Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to cover the Immigrant worksheet and the process for how to complete those personal tax returns in tax cycle. My name is Sharka Hoida. I'm a CPA, CGA, and Senior Product Manager with Tax Cycle. Today I'm going to cover how to enter those client details on the info form. We're going to talk a little bit about whether or not you should couple or not couple the return in the case of an immigrant or an emigrant, where you should be recording the spouse's income and world income, using that Immigrant worksheet in T1 to record the portion of income that is earned outside of Canada while they were not resident in Canada. And we're going to talk about the prorating rules a little bit around the non-refundable tax credits, specifically that 90% rule. And applying for, we'll cover a bit about applying for the child tax benefit. And I also will cover the GST and Canada carbon tax credit rebate, and e-filing and refiling. So I'm just going to hop on over to Tax Cycle. You can get that in the media window if you're not already there. And I have a personal tax return started here for Mr. Zhang. I've already entered some of the preliminary personal information. On the worksheet, it's important to make sure that you're entering all of the details. In this case, Mr. Zhang doesn't have a first name, and this was changed last year for the 2023 filing tax season, where Service Canada is in some cases entering the person's name in either the initial field or in the last name, so the full name will be going there. You do have to use however Service Canada has entered the information for the first tax return that you're filing when the person is immigrating into Canada. And so CRA now allows that first name to be blank. So you'll see that this is now a caution. You can just sign that off if this is the case. So I'm assuming that Mr. Zhang was on his social insurance number registered this way with just the last name. Or in some cases, immigrants only have only have one name, and that would go typically in the last name field. So that is now allowed. That does create some issues around the e-filing, electronic signatures. And so if you're requesting an electronic signature now for Mr. Zhang, the software that supports that typically requires a first and a last name. In that case, you can just either do your e-signature request manually by printing to a PDF and then uploading it into your e-signature software, or in some cases, you can just put a period in the first name to create that signature request. That works in tax folder, for instance. But do remember, if you do use that workaround to remove the period from the first name field, or you'll get an error when you try to go and e-file later. Now, I'm going to assume for the purposes of this demo that Mr. Zhang is married. So I've completed the marital status. There's no change in last name, obviously, because they're not a Canadian citizen, so I'm going to answer no. We're going to go down to the residency section. And in here, I have a residential address. So Mr. Zhang in Alberta, Mr. Zhang has immigrated to the province of Alberta. So that is what I am going to put in here for residency. And they'll be considered a resident of Canada for the immigration purposes. And now we need to enter the entry date. So let's assume that they came in May, around the 10th. And now it's going to show me that there's a proration that could potentially be applied to Mr. Zhang's return for the non-refundable tax credits based on that entry date. And in the past, if there was zero income reported for the world income, so that period of time before Mr. Zhang immigrated to Canada, or in the case of an emigrant, that period of time after they left Canada. If that is zero on the emigrant worksheet, so we're not reporting any other world income, CRA will deem that to the 90% rule to not apply. And in that case, they will use the prorated amount for all of those credits. So it's to the taxpayer's benefit to make sure that you're trying to complete all of the world income that was applicable to the taxpayer in that year, so that they can get the proper prorated or the full tax credit if they're eligible in order to get that. So now if this resident was leaving Canada, obviously we would put it in the exit date instead when they left, and the residency will be based on the exit date. So if they were in Alberta when they exited, that is what we're going to put up here for the purpose of this tax return. Going a little bit further down, we have a spouse. We indicated that Mr. Zhang is married, and so we would be required to complete the spouse information. So we would enter that here. If they're non-resident for the year, then we don't require the social insurance number. We don't have to file a tax return for the spouse in the case where they're non-resident, but we do have to still complete a Schedule 2 worksheet to record the world income, because some of those non-refundable tax credits are based on combined income and not just the income of the taxpayer we're filing for. So let's just put in Mrs. Zhang and birth date. And they will say they also do not have a first name. Because we're saying they're non-resident, we'll want to put in their non-resident address here. So I would need to say no here to not use the same address. And we would update this with whatever the actual foreign address is and country for the spouse if they are not resident in Canada. I also wanted to mention that where they're non-resident, obviously we're not filing for the spouse in Canada. If they are also resident, we can attach them to the file. So I did create a spouse return here. And if we have a situation where somebody is emigrating and maybe the spouse went on ahead, so they were non-resident for the year, but last year we filed them as resident, you can detach the spouse from the file by going to the spouse's information, and then up here in the client detail in the family section, you can just go ahead and detach that return. And it's going to ask you which one that you're detaching, and I want to detach the spouse, so I'm going to go ahead and detach them from my return. And it will create a separate file for the spouse now. And we're going to update the primary file. And I'm just going to say no to this one. So now I have a file where I just have the principal taxpayer in my file. So the other thing I wanted to cover here is in the case where my taxpayer may have some dependents, then you would also need to complete the dependent worksheet. And we have that under, you can get there through Fast Find, or if you just hit F4, bring up the search bar, we can look for the dependent worksheet, which is this one right here, and open that up, and we can put in the child's information here. And we're only going to do this for dependents that are also resident in Canada. So that is where we would record their information, same as we would do for any other return. Okay, so now we're going to go on to where, well, one more thing on here on the info page. So if I scroll down a little bit further, I'm just going to note here, I believe this is a newer field that was added. So this is actually calculating what the residency status is going to be for EFILE. And so all of the items are here. So you can review that that is calculating as expected. And if we go down a bit further, we also will want to make sure that we're checking off, in the case of an immigrant, that Zhang is filing for the first time. So we're going to say yes here. And then you'll also need to make the determination whether or not that T1135 is relevant here. So you want to just make sure that you're checking the rules. I believe there's an exemption for immigrants, but you'll want to just verify that information and make sure that you're on side with that particular filing as well. Okay, so going back to income, so we would enter Mr. Zhang's income in a very similar fashion to, well, exactly the same way as you would for any other taxpayer that you're filing a return for in Canada. Where we have the spouse and we're not filing a return for the spouse as well, we would enter the income information here on the Schedule S2. And there's a link here to that. So we're just going to jump on over to the spouse's information. And we would complete this section for the spouse as well. So we want to make sure that, I'm just trying to find where it is. Here we go, non-resident spouse or part-year resident. So we'll want to make sure that because the spouse is non-resident, we're going to say yes, that they were non-resident throughout the year. Otherwise, the calculation for those non-refundable tax credits is going to be incorrect. And then we'll just need to enter the net world income for the spouse here. So let's say the spouse earned a nominal amount for the year, and we'll just enter that there. Now, if they were a part-year residents, you can enter that information in the part-year resident section, and it will calculate the prorated factor down here as well. Or ideally, you would also be preparing the return for that part-year resident spouse as well, and then you'll get more accurate calculations in the tax return. So now we're going to hop on over to the Immigrant Emigrant worksheet. So again, we can go to Fast Find or F4 and look up the Immigrant Emigrant worksheet. And we're going to make sure that we're completing the details here. Where's this coming from? Okay. So now we have the entry date pulling into the Immigrant Emigrant worksheet, and we're going to want to make sure that we're completing this information. So as I said at the beginning of the webinar, if this is not completed, if we're not reporting the other income that Mr. Zhang earned while non-resident, then CRA will use this prorated amount for all of the tax credits. So we do need to make sure that we're at least attempting to gather the information about that world income. And so I did put in some T4 information, although it looks like I think what's happened is that I now have Mrs. Zhang's return open. I do. Okay, hang on just a second. Let's go back to Mr. Zhang's. Yes, okay, good. So we'll want to, just going to quickly add back the dependent information here. And of course, we would complete the date of birth as well, but let's go back to that Immigrant worksheet. And I do have some T4 information put in. I didn't make it very high so that we can just see how some of this works in here. So income from sources not subject to the Part 13 tax would go in here. So let's say they had some amount from Canadian sources, and then income, not subject to the tax, and then this section where it is subject to the tax. And then you can add all of the income from sources outside of Canada in this section. If you wanted to have it converted, so say it's reported to you in some other currency, we can add that here. So let's say it was reported to you in the Chinese currency. Then it will do the calculation for you. So we're going to put the foreign amount in here of the income. Let's say that was, oops, too high. And then all of the other information that would apply. We come down here, and this is going to calculate for you whether or not they have met that 90% rule requirement in order to not have the credits prorated. So that is based on Canadian sourced income versus net world income. And in this case, the prorated amount is going to apply. This is also the same form that you would complete in the case of an immigrant. So if they're leaving Canada, then this worksheet would be the portion of the world income for that time period in the year when they have, after they have left Canada in order to complete this return. And then if we come down a little bit further, there is some information down here that will flow through to the RC 151 and the RC 66 as well. And again, we have the option to add an exchange rate here if it's being reported to you in a foreign currency. And then this will flow out through to the other portions of the tax return. And just a quick note here on for immigrants. In the case where somebody is leaving Canada, we know that there's all of those rules around deemed dispositions on exit from Canada where some capital gains might get triggered. And we're going to talk about that a bit more in the capital gains webinar that is also coming up. Okay, so before I wrap up here, I just wanted to also talk about the fact that you can also apply for the child tax benefit directly from the T1. The form is available here. So again, you can fast find or search. I've already got it open in a tab here. So the RC66, the related schedule, and if there are multiple dependents and you run out of room, you would complete the additional dependents portion of that form. Tax Cycle will drop in whatever information we already have from the info form and from the Emigrant worksheet. Once this is completed with all of the relevant information, it does have to get mailed to CRA. So a paper copy has to be filed, or I believe you can also upload it through Represent a Client. Similarly, for the GST, I just scroll to the top of this form. Similarly, for the GST HST credit and the Canada carbon rebate application for people who become resident in Canada, that is also a form available in the T1 module. So again, we'll fill in what we can, or TaxCycle will fill in what it can from the information that's already entered for the tax return. And you would complete this as well for your immigrants. And this also has to be mailed to CRA in order to be processed on their end. It does not get electronically filed. When you're ready and your form, your return is ready to transmit, you would just do the regular transmit and e-file. TaxCycle will tell you if there are any exclusions that apply, in which case it may need to be paper filed, but in most cases, these emigrant tax returns can be e-filed. And also, if there is an amendment down the road, they can also, in some cases, be refiled to record that adjustment. And again, TaxCycle will alert you if there is an exclusion that applies and that return needs to be paper filed. And that is all that I had to cover here today. I want to thank you for joining me. I hope you found the content helpful. If you want to connect with other tax preparers and get in on the ongoing tax discussions, I do invite you to join TaxCycle's discussion board at protaxcommunity.com. If there is a topic you would like us to cover in a future webinar that is not already being covered, please email info@taxcycle.com with your suggestion. And I am wishing you a productive and hopefully low stress tax season. Bye for now.